Louis here, and this evening I would like to just discuss in the briefest of terms English Bible translations, because there seems to be a lot of confusion over what translation of the Bible to read. And of course some people would say, well, the King James Bible, that's the only Bible, it's the authorized version. King James put it out, he was a king and he was authorized, and this is now the translation of the Bible to read. But I would like to just start off with a very clear and simple statement that any translation of the Bible is just that. It's a translation. And it's a translation from Greek, Aramaic and Hebrew. Now the focus of tonight's short discussion is really going to be centered around the New Testament, because this is where the attack is. The attack is on Jesus, on his sovereignty, and his death and resurrection on the cross. And the attack comes in various forms. Now obviously a bad translation of the Bible would be the obvious way that an attack comes, and we could already go and point to Eugene Peterson's The Message, or that other funny Simmons translation, the Passion or whatever it is. These are things one just stays away from completely, because they're not translations of the Bible. But what makes most of the modern seemingly okay translations not good is very simply because they are taken from the wrong set of Greek texts. And as I said, I'm just going to focus very briefly on these Greek texts. I want to say right at the outset that I believe God has preserved his word extremely accurately for us, and there should not be really any dispute over the Greek texts. Yet unfortunately there is. In 1516, a certain person by the name of Erasmus put together the first set of Greek texts. These Greek texts are the texts that were used for a number of Bibles, including the King James Bible. And this set of Greek texts that was put together generally became known as the Textus Receptus. So let me say this right now. The Textus Receptus is a really good set of texts. It is a very good choice because these texts are Byzantine in origin, and the Byzantine Greek texts are the good Greek texts. They're the ones that I believe all Bibles should be translated from. So if you're looking for an English Bible, maybe the starting point is to see what they call it the textual basis, what the textual basis is. And just focusing on the New Testament, it should be telling you that it's Byzantine, or it can say Textus Receptus, or it can say received text, or it can say majority text. These are all pretty much the same thing. So the Textus Receptus was a collection of Byzantine texts, and of course the other name for those Byzantine texts is majority, because these texts are in the majority. Some of them are very old, some of them are not so old, but they all concur with each other extremely accurately. Now where the whole confusion came along is we had some very wicked people come along. Westcott and Hort, both Westcott and Hort were involved in occultic societies, and they decided to rewrite, redo, let's just say redo the Greek New Testament, and they went and got hold of two other scripts. The two scripts that they got hold of was Textus Sinaiticus, which is an Alexandrian text that's very old, but large parts of it are missing. It's full of alterations, and according to the official story, it was found in the basement of a monastery. So in the rubbish bin, to be specific, they throw in the rubbish. That is the official story. So Textus Sinaiticus is definitely not a text to use because of the alterations and because of the parts that are missing. The other text that Westcott and Hort got hold of was Textus Vaticanus. There was a text lying in the Vatican, and not even the Catholics would use it. It also was not a good one, and it did not compare exactly with Textus Sinaiticus either. Yet they took these two, and then of course they put this together in a Greek New Testament and published this in around about 1880. The American Standard is one of the first Bibles that was translated from this new Greek New Testament. And then after that, Nestle and Aland took up the helm, shall I say, of what Westcott and Hort had started. And the whole form of modern textual criticism came into being, where they'll look at the Byzantine text and then they'll look at the Textus Sinaiticus, which is an individual text, and look at the Textus Vaticanus, and then they will vote democratically on which one they think is the most accurate. Now, this is mind-boggling that so many people buy into this modern form of textual criticism, when in actual fact we have all these texts that are in the majority, also known as Byzantine texts, and which also the King James is translated from, a specific subset of them known as, now today known as the received texts, the Textus Receptus. So these texts, these Byzantine texts, and that also form the basis for the Textus Receptus, agree with each other, while these other two Alexandrian texts that they pulled out, these texts do not agree, and they don't even agree with each other. And that is where all the omissions come from in the Bible, where we see half a verse missing. Like, for example, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. That second part of the verse is missing, and you can go on and on and on. There's just example after example after example of twisting and things left out. So we can see the subtlety of the enemy and how clever he is, because obviously a translation that's not good, you go back to the Greek, and I'm just, as I say in this discussion, sticking to New Testament here, you go back to the Greek and you say, oh, but you haven't translated right from the Greek. But what these guys have done is they've actually cooked the Greek. They have a very poor, inaccurate version of the Greek New Testament that they're using. As I say, Nestle and Allen's, I can't quite, the name of their Greek text doesn't come quite to mind at the moment. It's got a very fancy name, Novum Testamentum Grace, or something like that. If you see that, just don't bother with that Bible. And so we can see how subtle and clever the enemy is, because he corrupts the Greek. Now, most of the modern English translations are taken from these corrupted Alexandrian texts. And the way they try and excuse away all the missing parts of the verses, missing verses, Great Commission in Mark and all over the place, the way they try and excuse all of this away is they say, oh no, the translators were writing little side notes, and then those little side notes became part of the text. But that is simply not true, because the Byzantine texts were being copied and rewritten all over the place, not just by one particular monastery, but by various groups of people. And all these Byzantine texts, all the ones that are commonly used, concur, agree with each other. So if people were writing side notes and adding to the words somehow, as these modern people think, then surely the side notes would not all be the same, and the texts would not concur, they would not agree with each other. Yet the Byzantine texts agree very, very accurately. So we have a situation where I believe God has truly preserved His word. We have the majority texts, as I say, also known as Byzantine texts, and they are in the majority and they agree with each other. So why modern Bibles are translated from the works of Westcott and Hort and Nestle and Allen, and this whole modern form of textual criticism with discussing things we shouldn't even be bothering with, it just boggles the mind. And the amount of people that have bought into this. So when choosing an English Bible, an English translation of the Bible, because remember, any Bible is a translation, we need to find a Bible that's translated from the correct group of texts. And just to mention again, that would be your Textus Receptus / received texts, which are also a subset of the Byzantine texts, or majority texts as they are known. So any Bible taken from those texts is they will agree with each other and are taken from the correct text. The next thing we look at is the method of translation, and you have various methods. Obviously, any translation is a compromise. If you try and translate too literally, then it's difficult to read, and it's awkward and difficult and ungainly to read. And if you are too loose in the translation, too paraphrase type in your translation, you could lose some of the original meaning. So any translation is a bit of a compromise, but I would like to say that my favorite translation of the English Bible that I like, enjoy reading, there's actually two. would be the World English Bible. This is a formal equivalence translation. There's no copyright on it. It's taken from Byzantine texts, and the beauty of this translation is they note all the differences between the Byzantine Textus Receptus and the NT, as they call it, which is the Nestle Aland Novum Grace whatever edition, which is what they are using for most of the modern English Bibles that are missing all these verses. So I really enjoy the World English Bible, and then another and there's no copyright. That's the big one, and then and that's why no one wants to print it, because these Bible houses really only want to print copyrighted Bibles. And then the other really nice translation is the modern English version, MEV. I've been reading this now a little while, and it seems pretty good. This is what I believe the New King James should have been, the MEV. The MEV sticks to the Textus Receptus, and it's a very nice, easy to read translation without being too. It's not paraphrased. It's also a good translation of the word. The King James Bible, an absolute landmark translation, but the English language has just changed so much since that translation. So I don't enjoy the King James that much. And another issue with the King James is they did not get everything right. There are some quite specific mistakes in the King James, things like Greek tenses, where they don't get the Greek tenses right. And an area that causes major confusion in the King James is the way they translate everything as hell, be it Gehenna, be it Sheol, be it outer darkness, I forget the word for that, Hades. These are the original words that were used. And everything gets translated as hell. But Sheol is not hell. Sheol, you can read up, is also referred to as Abraham's bosom. There are very specific punishments that are reserved in the Bible, and the Lord is specific about the fiery furnace, which is Gehenna, and also outer darkness is another place that he mentions. So it does help if we translate these words accurately. And also the Greek tenses, where, for example, it says we are being saved, and in the King James, in some places, according to the Word of God, we are saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. And the King James doesn't always get Greek tenses right, and even some of the verses that they use for in word of faith, like that, this binding and loosing doctrines, and that we have to look. The King James does not actually translate those verses correctly, but that is more for another discussion. I don't want to pull the King James apart, but I am saying that the English is not really in use. Some of the words have changed their use since the King James was translated. So I do believe it's important to read a translation of the Bible in modern English, taken from the correct group of texts, and unfortunately that rules out almost all modern English Bibles. As I mentioned, it basically leaves me, to the best of my knowledge, with the modern English version, MEV. It's a fairly new Bible. Textus Receptus is its textual basis, and the Web, the World English Bible, which is the one I read most of the time and quote. And there's no copyright on it as well. And the authors of the World English Bible, or the author of it, did a fantastic job. He based it off the American Standard, which is a very good translation. And of course I'd have to include the New American Standard as being a good translation, but taken from the wrong set of texts. And what the person did is he noted all the differences and corrected it back to the Byzantine texts. Well, I hope this helps you understand translations of the Bible. I think it's very important that we read a Bible that is translated from the correct group of Greek texts, and they are in the majority, and they do concur with each other. And to read a Bible that is where it's not a paraphrase, but they try to translate it fairly accurately. The World English Bible is a formal equivalence, which is a little bit awkward in places, but it's still my favorite translation. You find things in there, and you go check it against the Greek, and you see, wow, this is amazing. My friends, blessings. Hope this little chat helps you and helps clear up the confusion around English translations. It's not really that complicated. Blessings.